They told you communism lost, that it collapsed with the Soviet Union, that the West triumphed, that freedom prevailed. They told you that the great battle of ideologies had ended, that the Red Menace had been erased from history. And yet, look around. Everywhere you turn, the fingerprints of Marxist ideology are there, woven so deeply into the fabric of society that most people don't even recognize it. It didn't die, it evolved. It changed its name, its strategy, its branding. But at its core, it's the same doctrine that sought to replace free markets with central control, individual liberty with state power, and self-reliance with dependency. They whisper now that Martin Luther King Jr. was a communist, that the newly released files show the truth. But what they forget, what they don't teach, is that the Cold War was not just a battle of nations. It was a battle of ideas. The FBI watched King, spied on him, labeled him a threat. Why? Because he spoke of economic justice, because he associated with known leftists, because his movement threatened the carefully controlled social order. But the real question isn't whether King was a communist. The real question is why, decades after the fall of the USSR, so many of its ideas still remain deeply embedded in Western society. Take income tax, for example. Did you know that one of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto is a heavy progressive tax system? That's right. Karl Marx himself declared that wealth should be confiscated in increasing amounts the more someone earns. And yet today, most people accept it as normal. They argue about tax rates, but never question why the government has the right to take their earnings in the first place. Look at education. Another key tenet of Marxism? State-controlled schooling. In every socialist and communist regime, from the Soviet Union to Mao's China, the first step was always the same: take control of what children are taught. Indoctrinate them young. Erase inconvenient history. Condition them to see the state, not the family, as their protector. Teach them that authority is to be obeyed, not questioned. And today, across the West, governments dictate school curricula, censor alternative perspectives, and ensure that only approved narratives make it into textbooks. Is this really freedom? Consider welfare and the ever-expanding role of the government in people's lives. In every Marxist society, the promise was the same: the state will take care of you. From cradle to grave. Healthcare, housing, pensions, food, all provided by the government. But with dependence comes control. The more you rely on the system, the less power you have to resist it. A free man is not one who waits for government handouts to survive. And yet, today, generations have been conditioned to believe that without state intervention, society would collapse. Look at workers' rights movements, universal healthcare, and wealth redistribution schemes. The constant rhetoric of the rich versus the poor. This is classic Marxism. The idea that class struggle is the driving force of history, that the wealthy are inherently evil, that success is exploitation. It is the same ideological weapon that fueled revolutions in Russia, in China, in Cuba. But now, instead of calling it communist revolution, they call it equity. Instead of the proletariat, they say the marginalized. Instead of class warfare, they call it social justice. Different words, same playbook. Look at modern cancel culture. Marxist regimes always sought to erase dissent. Those who challenged the state were silenced, imprisoned, or re-educated. Today, it's not government agents breaking down doors, it's social media mobs, corporate censorship, and deplatforming. But the effect is the same: fall in line, repeat the correct slogans, or be cast out of society. Look at central banking and inflation. Karl Marx called for a central bank controlling the currency. Why? Because when the state controls money, it controls everything. Today, every Western nation has a central bank that manipulates interest rates, prints money, and erodes the value of your savings, all while telling you it's for your own good. Look at the rise of bureaucracy and unelected power structures. The European Union, the World Economic Forum, the massive growth of regulatory agencies, these are all part of the Marxist principle of state-controlled economies, where bureaucrats, not the free market, decide how wealth is distributed and how industries function. You see, communism was never about revolution alone. It was about infiltration, about gradually shifting societies away from free market capitalism and individualism and towards state control and collective dependency. And it worked. They convinced you that Marxism died when the Berlin Wall fell. But open your eyes. You're living in it. You just don't call it that anymore. They told you